Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're diving deep into something I know a lot of you struggle with.
Yeah.
The fear of speaking English.
Mm.
We asked you to send in your experiences, your questions, and anything you wanted to know.
Yeah.
And it's clear this is a topic that resonates
Absolutely.
because over 40% of language learners experience anxiety when speaking.
That's a common fear for sure.
So let's unpack this fear. What makes speaking out loud such a challenge for so many of us?
Well, one of the biggest hurdles is definitely the fear of making mistakes.
Right, like grammar errors or mispronunciation.
Exactly. And then there's the fear of judgment.
Oh, yeah. Thinking people are judging your accent or your every word.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's not even other people we're worried about.
Oh, you mean
It's that inner critic.
that little voice in our head?
Yeah, the one that tells us we're not good enough.
That we should just stay quiet.
Yeah, perfectionism can be a real roadblock.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, one story from our listeners really stuck with me. It was about a student who was so afraid of mispronouncing a word that she would avoid using it altogether,
Wow.
even if it was the perfect word for the situation.
I've seen that happen so many times.
Have you?
It's like they get paralyzed by the fear of sounding silly.
Yeah.
But here's the thing.
What's that?
Most people are more focused on the message you're trying to get across than on analyzing every little detail of your pronunciation.
Right. They're not sitting there with a scorecard.
Exactly. And in my experience, people actually appreciate it.
They do.
Yeah, when someone is making the effort to communicate in a different language.
It shows you're trying.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like taking that first step despite the fear.
Like that quote, courage isn't the absence of fear, but taking action in spite of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how do we move from fear frozen to confidently communicating?
Well, starting small can be really effective
Maybe like
instead of jumping into a high-pressure situation.
Like giving a presentation?
Yeah, try starting with low-stakes conversations.
Oh, I see. Like chatting with a friend or even talking to yourself in the mirror.
Exactly. It might sound silly,
It does.
but even those seemingly small interactions can build your confidence.
It's like a warm-up before the big game.
Mm-hmm. Another strategy is preparing in advance.
Oh, like if you're nervous about ordering food at a restaurant.
Yeah, look at the menu beforehand, practice some phrases.
So you're not caught off guard.
Exactly. It takes the pressure off.
It's like having a cheat sheet for your brain.
Right. And one more technique that's often overlooked is breathing.
Breathing.
Yeah, when we're anxious, our breathing gets shallow.
Oh, I've noticed that.
And that actually increases those feelings of stress.
Really?
Mm-hmm. But taking a few deep, slow breaths can help calm your nerves.
So it's like hitting the reset button.
Exactly. It helps you feel more grounded and in control.
I love these tips.
Good.
They're so practical. Now, one thing that came up in our listener research was this idea of deliberate practice.
Oh, yeah. That's a key concept.
Could you explain that a bit? It sounds like a more focused approach to practice.
It is. Deliberate practice means identifying your weak spots and then tailoring your practice to specifically target those areas.
Oh, so it's not just going through the motions.
No, it's about being intentional with your efforts.
So if I struggle with using descriptive language,
You would focus on incorporating more adjectives and adverbs into your practice.
I get it. It's like laser focus practice.
Precisely. That kind of focus can really accelerate your progress.
It's like working smarter, not harder.
Exactly. And you can apply this to any aspect of language learning.
Grammar, vocabulary, even pronunciation.
Anything you want to improve.
I love it. Deliberate practice, I like that. It's like taking all that nervous energy and focusing it on something specific.
Exactly. And speaking of specific techniques,
Yeah.
one that's really effective is shadowing.
Shadowing.
You've heard of that, right?
I'm not sure.
So shadowing is basically
Okay.
finding a piece of audio or video in English and mimicking the speaker.
Oh, like repeating after them.
Exactly. You try to match their tone, their rhythm, even their pauses.
Well, it's like a vocal copycat.
Yeah, you could say that. It's a great way to improve your pronunciation
I could see how that would help.
and your fluency. You start to internalize those natural speech patterns.
That makes sense. And the best part is you can do it with anything you enjoy. Podcasts, movies, even audiobooks.
Exactly. It's like turning your leisure time into a language learning session.
I love that. Now, another technique I've heard about is recording yourself speaking.
Oh, yeah, that can be a game changer.
But it can also be kind of scary, right?
It can be a little awkward at first.
Yeah, hearing your own voice.
But it's so valuable because it helps you identify areas where you can improve.
So you can pinpoint those little stumbles or pronunciation issues,
Yeah, exactly. It's like having an instant feedback loop.
instead of just feeling like something's off.
You can actually hear it and then work on it.
I see. It takes the guesswork out of it.
And the more you do it, the less awkward it becomes.
You get used to it.
Yeah, and you actually start to feel more comfortable hearing yourself speak English.
That's a big confidence booster for sure. Now, we can't talk about speaking practice without mentioning role-playing.
Ah, yes, the classic.
It's been around forever, but there's a reason for that.
It works because role-playing lets you practice specific scenarios.
Oh, like ordering coffee or asking for directions?
Exactly. Situations you might encounter in real life.
And that way, when those situations come up, you're not as nervous.
Exactly. You've already rehearsed it in your mind.
It's like having a script for everyday conversations.
Yeah, and the key is to make it as realistic as possible.
Oh, you mean
Like, really imagine the setting, the people you're talking to.
the whole scene?
The more you can embody the scenario, the more effective the practice will be.
It's like method acting for language learning.
Exactly. So we've got shattering for pronunciation and fluency,
Recording ourselves for feedback.
and role-playing to practice real-world situations.
Those are some great techniques. Are there any others that you think are particularly helpful?
Well, there's one more I want to talk about,
Okay.
and it's more about a mindset shift.
Oh, interesting. Tell me more.
It's about turning fear into a catalyst for growth.
Instead of seeing it as the enemy,
Exactly. Fear is often a sign that we're stepping outside our comfort zone.
that we're challenging ourselves.
Yeah. So instead of saying, I'm so scared to do this,
You could say
I'm excited to see what I can learn from this challenge.
that's a much more empowering perspective.
It is. And when we approach language learning with a growth mindset, even our mistakes become valuable learning opportunities.
We're less likely to get discouraged.
Right. And more likely to keep pushing forward.
It's like that saying, fall 7 times, stand up 8.
Exactly. So embrace the stumbles.
Learn from them.
And keep going. Now, one of the biggest fears people have about speaking English is
What's that?
making mistakes and sounding foolish.
Yeah, that's a common one.
But here's the thing. Everyone makes mistakes.
Even native speakers?
Especially native speakers. It's part of being human.
Oh, so it's not just us language learners.
No, not at all. It's like when you're typing and you make a typo.
Happens all the time.
It doesn't mean you're a bad typist.
Right.
It just means you're human.
I like that analogy.
The key is to not let those mistakes define us.
We're not our mistakes.
Exactly. Instead of seeing them as failures,
We can see them as
feedback, they show us where we need to adjust our practice.
like a GPS for language learning,
Exactly. They're just course corrections.
guiding us toward fluency.
And here's another important mindset shift.
Tell me.
Focus on progress, not perfection.
I think a lot of us struggle with that,
We do. We get caught up in this idea that we need to sound perfect.
like a native speaker.
But the reality is language learning is a journey, not a destination.
It's ongoing.
Yeah. There's always something new to learn, some aspect you can refine.
So if we wait until we feel perfect to start speaking,
We'll never speak at all.
that's so true. It's like waiting for the perfect moment to start anything.
You miss out on all the experiences along the way.
Exactly. So celebrate those small wins. Did you manage to order your coffee without freezing up?
High five.
Did you understand a conversation without needing to ask for clarification?
That's amazing progress.
It's so easy to focus on what we haven't achieved yet.
But those small victories are important,
They keep us motivated,
and they remind us that we are making progress.
even if it's not always obvious.
Right. And the more you practice, the easier it gets.
The fear starts to fade,
What once felt terrifying becomes second nature.
like riding a bike.
Exactly. Scary at first, but eventually you're cruising along without even thinking about it.
So embrace the journey, celebrate the progress, and trust the process.
Trust that with consistent effort, fluency will come.
I love that. Now, you've worked with so many language learners over the years.
I have.
What are some of the most inspiring stories you've encountered?
Oh, wow. There are so many. But one that comes to mind is a student who was absolutely terrified of speaking English.
Like, couldn't even utter a word.
Well, she understood the language, but
Bah.
the fear of sounding foolish just completely paralyzed her.
I can relate to that.
And then she had this opportunity to travel to an English-speaking country.
Oh, wow. Talk about a sink or swim situation.
It was. And at first she was completely overwhelmed.
I can imagine.
She stumbled, she felt embarrassed, she wanted to give up.
But she didn't.
No, she persevered. She started with those small interactions.
Ordering food, asking for directions.
Exactly. And each small success gave her a little boost of confidence.
It's amazing how those little wins can chip away at the fear.
They show us that we're capable of more than we think.
So she kept pushing herself.
She did. And as she practiced more, her confidence grew, her fluency blossomed.
That's fantastic.
And she realized that the fear she had built up in her mind was actually far worse than the reality.
Than actually speaking.
Exactly.
What a powerful reminder that sometimes we're our own worst enemy.
We are. And that the only way to overcome fear is to face it head on.
Her story is truly inspiring.
It is. It shows the transformative power of taking action, even when it's scary.
It's amazing how much our mindset can impact our experience, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
We've talked about reframing fear and mistakes, but are there any other perspective shifts that can help us on this journey to confident English speaking?
There are a few that come to mind.
Okay.
One that I find particularly helpful is shifting the focus from ourselves to the connection we're trying to create.
I like that.
Often when we're feeling anxious about speaking,
Yeah.
we get so caught up in our own heads.
Like worried about how we sound or what people will think.
Exactly. And we forget that communication is ultimately about connecting with other human beings.
It's about sharing ideas, building relationships.
So instead of thinking, what if I mess up?
Yeah.
Try asking yourself, what message am I trying to convey? What impact do I want to have on this interaction?
So it's about focusing on the purpose of the communication.
Exactly. When we prioritize connection over perfection, the pressure lessens and we can approach speaking with more authenticity and ease.
That makes sense. It's like that saying, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel.
Exactly. If you can focus on creating a positive and genuine connection, the little imperfections fade into the background.
Because ultimately, people care more about how you make them feel
Right.
than whether you use the perfect grammar or pronunciation.
Another helpful shift is embracing the beauty of imperfection.
Oh, tell me more about that.
So much of our fear comes from this idea that we need to be perfect.
Yeah, like we need to sound exactly like a native speaker.
Exactly. But the reality is every language is full of variations, dialects, accents.
It's what makes language so
And
interesting.
it does. It's what makes it so rich and dynamic.
So instead of striving for this unattainable ideal of perfection,
We can celebrate the uniqueness of our own voice and our own journey with the language.
I love that. It's like giving ourselves permission to be ourselves.
Exactly. And when we embrace imperfection, we open ourselves up to more joy and creativity in the learning process.
We're less afraid to experiment, to play with the language.
To make those mistakes that ultimately lead to growth.
It's like that Japanese concept of wabi-sabi,
Oh, love that.
finding beauty in the imperfections.
Yeah. Maybe we need a wabi-sabi approach to language learning.
I think so. Now, speaking of different cultural perspectives, one of the most valuable things we can do is surround ourselves with supportive people.
Oh, absolutely. Find language partners, join online communities.
Connect with others who are on a similar journey.
Exactly. Having that sense of community can make such a difference.
It's like having a cheer squad for your language learning adventures.
I love that analogy. It's so true.
Because learning a language isn't just about memorizing words and grammar rules.
It's about stepping into a new culture.
A new way of thinking, a new way of expressing yourself.
Exactly. And having a supportive community can make that journey so much more enriching and enjoyable.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
From understanding the roots of fear to exploring practical techniques and powerful perspective shifts.
It's been a great conversation.
It has. As we wrap things up, is there any final thought you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I would just say this.
Yeah.
Remember that language learning is a marathon, not a sprint.
It takes time and patience.
It does. Be patient with yourself, celebrate your progress, and don't be afraid to make mistakes.
The most important thing is to keep moving forward.
One step at a time, and enjoy the incredible adventure of discovering a new language and a new world.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and insights with us today.
It's been my pleasure.
This has been such an enlightening conversation.
I agree.
And to all our listeners out there, we hope this deep dive has given you some valuable tools and a fresh perspective on your journey to confident English speaking.
You've got this.
Until next time, keep practicing and keep those conversations flowing.
Bye, everyone.